Okay, welcome once again to the Cow Report. I'm your host, Chuck Lee, and this program is coming to you live from beautiful downtown L.E. Phillips Memorial Library and Taco Stand. We're glad to have you on the program watching us tonight. And you know, Fred, I think it's almost the end of winter now, isn't it? And of course, I refer to you as Fred the True Stafford, ladies and gentlemen.
It's not, I don't know, we're liable to get a foot of snow yet.
Well, I think it is the last day of winter was tomorrow.
Yeah.
So as you're watching this, it's right around the corner, the last day of winter. As you're thinking about this tomorrow, it'll be the first day of spring. Think of it that way. Okay. And with us today, Fred, we have a special guest with us. And,
You can put that on there.
oh yeah, Fred here has been handing out his little shamrocks all weekend, and you have your annual shamrock drive for the Catholic War veterans, Fred. And how'd you do this year?
Well, we did fairly good, but we should have done better.
I hear they won't let you hang around the post office anymore.
No, they don't let us do that there.
Oh.
I wasn't out except on Sunday and Saturday night at churches.
But you did pretty good, though. Did you do better than last year or not?
No, I think a little bit less.
Oh. Well, I know you've been a little under the weather. How you doing with that deal there,
Still
Fred?
got it. Coughing.
Well, I'm glad to see you're hanging in there instead of just going to the nursing home. It's better to keep active, isn't it, Fred?
Yes.
Okay, now, with us today, we have a special guest from St. Paul, Minnesota, and with us we have Mr. Dan Pilla Sr. Some of you might have heard of Dan Pilla Jr. Well, this is Dan Jr.'s father, Dan Sr., and Dan is the modern-day Thomas Paine. That's what some of his contemporaries have called him. And Dan, we've had one of your friends on the show, Byron Dale, about 6 months ago, and we talked about money and the monetary system. And we got wound up, started taking calls, and by the end of the show, we had more questions and answers. And I spent another 3 hours with Byron over at a coffee shop that night talking about this subject. And you are with the Coalition for Monetary Reform, but you've been kind of trying to educate people on a lot of different subjects, and money is just one of them for quite a few years. So I want to welcome you, Dan, to the show.
Thank you, Chuck. It's my pleasure to be here.
And you drove all the way over from St. Paul tonight. And so tonight we're going to be talking about several things, and one of them is this thing they call money. And you have several little brochures on it. I know you got a business card here. First big question is, a lot of people want to know, behind us here we got a sheet here of these what they call greenbacks. I know they've had quite a few different names over the years, haven't they? Since the 1780s.
That's the name for it, the Continental Buck. In other words, this is how the government prints up money. They print a sheet of paper like this, 32 bills in one piece of paper at the rate of 6,000 sheets an hour. That means from the floor to the top of a desk, 6,000 sheets, 24 hours a day, all year long. How would you like, then, they take a stack like this here and sell 1,000 $100 bills for $12 to the private bankers. They sell 1,000 $50 bills for $12 to the private bankers, 1,000 20s, 10s, etc. And the private bankers mean the Federal Reserve Corporation. Now, the government needs money. They go back and borrow it and pay face value plus interest. You heard of your friendly national debt, haven't you? We've got to balance the budget, right? How do you do it when it's based on fraud? Because it's just no way it can be done, because these politicians tell you we're going to have a balanced budget. There's no way, because no money comes into existence until it's loaned into existence. There's no other way. But they always loan the principal, but what about the interest?
Now, they call it the Federal Reserve Board. Now tell us, is it federal, is it a reserve, and is it a board?
It's a private corporation of private bankers, about 8 families, and most of them are from the international bankers all over the world except in the United States.
And what do you mean by, you mean like the Rockefellers and people
the Rothschilds,
they own
the Federal Reserve.
Is this really a central bank then? Is this?
Well, that's what it is, see, because when they set it up, I think it was Paul Warburg who set it up back in 1913. They said, we're going to have a world government whether we like it or not. Think about it. World government. They're ramming us down our throats like you would not believe. An interesting thing, Now, they've got us involved in many wars, many depressions, and hyperinflation. Back in 1972, I was on TV in Minnesota on Channel 11, and I said that we compare with Germany with the inflation that we're facing. And what are you going to do, speaking to the legislature, what are you going to do as a lawmaker to protect us from the inflation and the confetti money that we're confronted with? Well, I got laughed at, but you tell me we have not had any problems since then? Then speaking of a thing that's very important and bothers me very much, one of the authors of the Federal Reserve Act was Carter Glass. And there was a hearing before the Economic Committee of the Congress of the United States back in 1965, and he said, I quote, "The purpose of the Federal Reserve System is a front for the banking system of this country to experiment in social planning. When they create these wars, whether they're no-win wars and win them, then we send everything overseas, the land use programs that they're knocking out of us, knocking our industry out of here, they're knocking jobs out of here left and right, and then in the meantime send them all down Mexico or in China and Taiwan. Hey, we were the greatest, we were the envy of the world at one time, but all of a sudden we went right downhill. Why? We've got to know why, because the engine is destroyed. Now how are we going to fix this engine if we do not find out the reason why it went kaput and what we have to do? And truthfully speaking, we have defied God's law on money as well as health, and that's why we've gone down the hill, because man likes to play smarter than God. Well, that just can't be. And if we don't resolve this problem, get back to the basics, obey the Holy Scriptures as well as obey the Constitution, we're going to go nothing but down, further down. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so the United States Treasury prints this stuff.
No, the United States government prints it. And then they sell it to the
Printing office prints
the
it.
Bureau of
Print it,
Engraving
okay,
and Printing
excuse me,
prints it.
print the-
Then they sell it to the private
That's the only
bank.
place that the federal government has. They're the ones that print it, and they sell it to the private bankers around the country in big stacks for pennies on the dollar.
$12 for 1,000. Now this was, I have a letter here from the Department of Treasury back in 1973, I believe it is, or 75, I can't. 1975, where it says slightly expensive 1 cent per note. And here's that letter from the Treasury. Well, anyway, now with inflation going up, now they're about $22 a thousand. Big
Okay.
deal. Write a check with no funds, just write a check out for that stack of money. That's fraud.
Okay, when that money then gets to the private bankers and they've got it for just basically the cost of the ink and the paper,
Correct?
then how do they get it into existence and how does interest come in?
Okay, now that's the $64 question, and that's the problem. For instance, let's suppose you have a checking account. You have only one. Now, I went to the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis, how to go about buying a bank and the procedures. And this is where I learned it, from the horse's mouth. Well, visualize yourself as an individual banker. We'll call you Wisconsin State Bank. That means a private bank. Okay, not a national bank now. You can loan to your neighbors 80 times your $100 balance, your assets, your total assets. When you put that loan into existence, you're creating a bill of credit, which is prohibited by the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. No state shall emit a bill of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. All right? Now, when you credit my account $8,000 at 80 times, I have to give you $16,000 in collateral, don't I? I sign my collateral to you. Right then and there, that money is created out of thin air. That's what OTA means, because no nation can survive when taxes are assessed OTA from money created OTA. And that is the crux of the whole issue.
So once they create it, then they have to tack interest onto it.
Well, that comes later now. How do you, the interest was not created now. See? In the meantime, you go to the bank for a loan, put up your collateral, and people really don't earn money, or make money, I should say. Making it is here. They make it, create it out of thin air. In the meantime now, if you, stop?
No, keep going.
If you sell something to me, you're getting it from me. So keep that in mind always. It's never making, because make something is creating something.
So this is just created out of thin air.
Correct.
It's not like digging gold out of the ground and
No,
turning
no.
it into money.
Right.
Because gold has a value in itself.
Well,
You look at a piece, it's gold, it's a metal, you can hold it in your hand and you know it's got a worth.
gold and silver has been money for 7,000 years of recorded history. And the scriptures even talk about that also. We're not to have diverse weights and measures. For instance, speaking of diverse weights and measures, you get back to a 1981 penny. Melted down, it weighs 1.95 pennyweights of copper. This is an interesting thing now. You talk about a sham. The dime weighs 1.4 pennyweights of copper. Why would the penny be more valuable than the dime? Something wrong with a weight and measure then, isn't it? Well, the law says that the Coinage Act of 1792, when our forefathers, they had some smarts, believe me. They said a penny shall weigh 11 pennyweights of copper. And anybody in the mint, in the government, that tampers with the coins and clips them, the penalty was death. And look at the heartache and hard times that our people have gone through because of the out of thin air money, the credit, and because, as Thomas Jefferson said, very succinctly or beautifully, and here's what he said: if Americans ever allow banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, all the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless. Homeless. Third president of the United States called that shot back in the 1700s. Isn't this tragic?
So now when we use this money now, say I go to the bank here in town and I want to borrow $50,000 for a house.
Mm-hmm.
And they tack interest onto that.
Correct.
Are they creating the money out of thin
No.
air to begin with?
Correctly, but they didn't create the interest. See, and that's how they create all these depressions, because as you pay it back with the interest, you're sucking the money out of the economy. And for instance, you're getting back to the contract with the Republicans that they're going to balance the budget and do this and do that. I got news for you. Anybody who tells you they can balance a budget with this OTA money is a fraud and a cheat.
Well, how does, when you're talking about that, then when you get that loan for $50,000, then you pay back over $100,000
About 125, 150.
in interest. So
Right.
that extra $70,000
Takes all the money out.
devalue, it makes money cheap, worth less than,
Well, what it does is worth less is one item, then it also creates hard times. Because I want to defy anyone who can walk in a supermarket with a bushel basket full of money and walk out with everything he wants. Can't be done. Everybody's hurting, everybody's broke because they put the squeeze on, calling in the loans. And when they don't put out a loan, no money comes in existence. And that's what it's all about.
well, how do banks keep functioning then? Are they living off the loans they made 20 years ago? Or?
Well, here's how that works. You ever got a bum check from anyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a very simple way of explaining it. I give you a check. It bounces higher than a kite. Oh, I'm sorry, Chuck. I give it to you from a wrong account. So I give you another. You bring it back to me. I give you another one. And that bounced again also. Well, what I did was keep giving you another check to finally, oh, that bank is no good. I had to change banks and go down the street and get to a different bank. Well, when I did that, I gave you another check. But did you get paid? No. All I did was kite a check to you, right? Well, with the banks now, when their loans come due, you have to, well, Chuck, will you take my note for $1,000? For $1,000, I owe you $1,000 plus 10% interest. Now, when I give you that note now, did I pay you? No. At the end of the year now, I owe you $1,100, right? Oh, Chuck, you're going to really make some money now because, by golly, we're going to renew that note and you're going to get 15% interest. Did you get paid? Well, that's how it's done. They just keep rolling it over. And that's what they're doing at the bonds. That's where the national banks have put these bond issues out in local neighborhoods. And for instance, they'll need a bond issue. And you probably have seen it in your paper here. There's no funds available between here and New York for no less than 10% interest. What are we going to do? No money available from here to California for no less than 10 or 12% interest. All of a sudden, a couple of the banks around town, they bid on the bond issue. This is a national bank now. They will bid against each other, and the hero will get his picture in the paper when he hands a check to the mayor for $50 million because he charged the city only 5% interest. Well, I got news for you. How did he create the money?
I don't
Out
know.
of thin air. Now, here's the key. What is the collateral on that? It's the taxing power of the real estate. That's why we have such high real estate taxes. Now, if we get back to God's law, we get back to the Constitution, which is basically based on God's law, we would not have the problems we have. Because we're forced out of our homes, the banks are foreclosing left and right on the people, people are being homeless, foreclosing on the farms, and you tell me that I'm wrong.
I know a guy here in town that owns a coin shop, and every time the taxes come out, women start showing up with their wedding rings, trying to cash them in so they can
Well,
get enough money together
that
to
tells
pay
you-
their taxes,
Now
to
that
stay
tells
in
you
their
something.
home.
Right, that tells you something. People are being forced out of their homes. And that's not, God wants us healthy, wealthy, and wise. Have we been very wise? We letting the politicians get away with murder?
It's very confusing. Now, we're going to be taking some calls here. Got a couple of people been waiting on the line, Dan. And before we take our first call, we always try to ask our guest what happened on this date in history. And we see if we can stump the stars. And of course, Fred, he's usually batting close to 1,000, but I think he stumbled on the last show. So I'll see if I can find a real tough one for you here.
Well, I don't know. I'll look on my
Let's see if I
calendar.
can find one on money here. I'm sure there's one in here somewhere on money. Okay, here's one. All right.
How about if I take the month of March? Wouldn't that be nice? On,
Yeah.
on the month of March, on the 5th of March, was the Boston Massacre in 1770. And then George Washington, on the 6th of March, proclaimed a day of fasting and prayer for our country because we were in trouble. And then Patrick Henry's famous speech in 1775, "Give me liberty or give me death." Because you see, Americans think they're free, and they're living under an illusion. Because I would like to ask you, name me 3 things you can do without 1, getting a permit, 2, pay a tax, 3, use your social surveillance number, and 4, without getting a license or a permit. You name me 3 things you can do of those 4 things. Tangible. Don't tell me you can go out and pray. It's got to be tangible.
Not too many of them left. You don't need some kind of permit, especially in Wisconsin. I think we're worse than Minnesota is on those.
Well, I hate to tell you,
We've
but
got all these secret taxes. They call them permits and hunting license and all that, but they're a built-in tax.
well, one of the politicians said,
Revenue enhancers.
one of the politicians says that if we can license them to drive a car, which is another abomination, we can license them for their guns. And I got news for you. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody to own a gun or not. That's not my position here. My position is that we have to get back to God's law and the whole root of how our country was founded. And that's why I put together this calendar with the Bill of Rights, with the Constitution, the proper use and function of the Bill of Rights, commentaries from the Scriptures, commentaries from our forefathers, and how to use it. Because if we don't use it properly, forget it. Because if you don't know your rights, you don't use them. If you don't use them, you lose them.
You know, that there would probably be outlawed in the socialist public school system. They probably wouldn't even let it in the front door.
Well, I got news for you.
If you got any Bible
it's-
scriptures.
It's our history. We have some in there, commentaries, that fits each amendment. Commentaries on the money issue on November and December.
Okay, I got one here I want to ask you. On this date in 1765, this act goes into effect in the American colonies, March 22nd, angering the colonists and sparking rebellious acts. And it was this certain blank act, 1765.
Oh, brother.
And it really made the colonists mad, and they started thinking about liberty. And
Stamp Act, wasn't it?
yep, it was the Stamp Act.
Yeah, the Stamp. That's what
That was one of the early taxes. They call it a Stamp
the
Act.
Stamp. Oh, they still have it on there now. Real estate transactions.
Oh, is that the
What do you-
transfer?
Yeah. What do you think?
Transfer tax? Okay, we're going to take a call here and see if we have anyone out there who wants to talk about the money system tonight. And I think we'll take this call here first. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Would you rather that we had no taxes? Is that what you're saying?
No, sir. We have to get back to the way our country was founded because we have to have.
We have to go back in time 200 years?
Yes, sir, because they went through the same thing we're going through now. And I got news for you. We are being taxed out of our homes right now. We're being taxed out of our bread. And this is what we have to do. We have to get back to the basics of our country was founded and not create money out of thin air. That's the problem. If we get back to an honest money system and not be able to create money out of thin air, we'd have our problem solved. Right in the bud.
Well, how can you say that money is created out of thin air? I'm not.
You didn't listen very well, sir.
No, you didn't explain it right.
Okay, maybe I'll do it again then, sir. I'll do it again. Visualize yourself as a banker. You have $100 in total assets in your bank, right?
Yeah.
You can loan me 80 times that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to give you 2-to-1 collateral. 80 times $100 is $8,000. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You credit my account. Did you give me money or did you give me a bill of credit?
Well, I gave you money.
How could you when you only had 100 to begin with?
Well, because I was backed by the government.
It is?
Yeah.
Well,
You can't just give a loan to somebody unless you're a member of the FDIC and have the backing that you're talking about.
Sir, have you studied the money issue?
Yeah.
You have real well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what you do. Write a letter to the Treasury Department, ask them how money comes into existence. Write a letter to Federal Reserve in Chicago, and here's their exact quotation. The actual process of money creation takes place in a commercial bank. That's the quote from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago.
Yeah.
Well, so you haven't studied it enough, sir.
So in order for you to get the loan, you're not going to pay me back for that, right?
I didn't say that, sir, because I've never reneged on anything I borrow from anyone.
Okay, well, that means that the money was not created. You're just taking a stay of, you're paying it back at a later date. It's still there. It's already in existence. You're just paying back future dollars that you own.
Sounds like you had an economic course at the universities. And to get back to that now, you need 3 things to control people. Listen to this now.
Okay.
What 3 things you need? Control the money system, right?
Okay, yeah.
Be able to create, and not just create it out of thin air, but control the whole money system.
That makes
Control the education system, which includes the churches, and control the news media. And that's exactly how they put us under. False information and false education.
Okay, so why are you on the air? I mean, well, why wouldn't they control you and keep you off the air?
Well, I was. Now, is this? By the way, is this station right here going all over town, or is this a closed circuit thing with very few people?
I have no
It has
idea.
potential.
Does it go all over the state?
No.
Just this area.
Just this area. Now you don't see NBC with it, do you?
Well, why
All
don't
right.
you ask them if you can go on? Have you?
I have. They have. People have my literature all over the country. Now, and I'll tell you what. You prove me wrong, sir, and I'll give you $1,000 in cash.
Well, that's fine. You're suggesting that we go back 200 years in time and everything's fine and dandy, but the fact is America can't travel back in time. And
Oh, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute, sir. When you say travel, do you believe that we should steal from each other? That's the 10 Commandments. That goes back eons.
no, well, are you gonna? I mean, you're gonna pick and choose on 10 Commandments.
Well, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. The 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, right? Usury.
Yeah, well, okay, I agree with that. I don't understand what that has to do with money.
Well, you're saying that a bank only needs, what, 5% reserves? And
They don't need any reserves anymore. They don't.
Didn't they
need-
used to have to keep
They
so
used
much?
to
in
have
the-
to have 25% reserves at one time, but that went down the river.
Uh-huh.
The reserves went down the river. I'm falling apart here.
Here, let me get it.
Thank you. Now, they don't require any reserves anymore, and this I again got from the horse's mouth from the Federal Reserve of Minneapolis.
Well, I hope that explained it somewhat to you, caller. You know, I heard a tape not too long ago where they still had to keep so much reserve, but they took gold out of circulation in, what, 1933 totally?
Well, they took it out from Americans, but in 1971, Richard Nixon closed the gold window for foreigners, because at that time, that's how they were depleting our country and breaking us, is because they put you in jail if you had gold in 1933 to 1974, 75, January 75, I believe it was, when they took it off. And before that, you'd end up in jail if you had gold.
So as soon as they took off the lid, it went sky high.
Well, because you see, anybody wants to know the value of a dollar, take $20, like a $20 gold piece, 1 ounce of gold, and divide it by the price of gold today, which is approximately $380, and I would guess it's about a nickel. I haven't got a calculator handy, but I would say it's about a nickel. That's how you define the value of the dollar today.
The dollar's worth about a nickel in today's.
That's right.
Okay, well, we've got another caller waiting online too, so we'll go ahead and take this call. Then I wanted to ask you a question about how we're defining, what do you mean by defying the law of gravity? Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I have a question for Mr. Pilla.
Yes, sir.
Like, about the money system, like, how much would it cost me for you to give me a blowjob?
Well, thank you.
Okay, well, we have some
See,
people.
that's what we call the rationale of someone who really thinks the almighty Caesar or the almighty bankers can do no wrong, and that's the mentality of why the country's gone to pot, because, again, there's another defiance of the law of gravity.
Well, what I say is part of the
Education system.
socialist public education system
Well-
has taught people like him how to have sex, and they're
No,
good at swearing.
no, I don't know.
They're good swearers, but they can't count to 100.
No, he can't. I don't think he'd be able to make it on his own out there, because that's the mentality and why the country has really gone wacko with Sodom and Gomorrah. And you tell me we're not going down the river, pal, I got news for you.
Okay. Now, Fred, I know that you sat at home all weekend eagerly drawing up questions for Dan Pilla because
No, I didn't.
and well, you were supposed to. So let's hear
All right.
your question.
I don't have a question at the present time. I was busy this weekend selling shamrocks, counting the money that came in. That's what I was doing.
Okay, thank you. All right. Now, what do you exactly mean by defying the law of gravity? What's
The law of gravity is God's law. People today wonder why we have high sickness. How come we're so broke? Well, let's look at it. Many people eat out of their toilet bowls and don't even know it. Now, what do I mean by that? Have you ever gone out and had a pizza with mushrooms and pepperoni and sausage? Pig meat. Well, I read a book called The Cancer Cures at Work. Pig meat and mushrooms cause cancer. Think about it. In Deuteronomy 14, Leviticus 11 tells us what to eat, what not to eat. Okay? It's as simple as that. Now, shrimp, lobster, the same old story. They're the environmental protectors of the seas and the rivers. But what do? We go out and eat them, then we wonder why we got cancer and heart trouble.
Well, just like cockroaches. I think the shrimp are related to a cockroach.
Well, then, what about the money situation? Well, we defied God's law on money and defied it in Deuteronomy 25. Hey, foreclosures and bankruptcies. No divers, weights, and measures. And we wonder why we got troubles.
Well, that's some.
Well,
food for-
and also one more thing. If we go by Deuteronomy 28, from 1 to 14, we'll give the blessings. And we have the curses now from 15 to 24. Do your own homework, people, and don't believe a word I said. If you do, you're a fool. But if you don't check it out, you're a bigger fool. And please, check out this money system, because that's the root cause of the problem in our country today.
Okay, now what was the deal? And then we're going to take a couple more calls here. What was the deal on this big $50 billion bailout to Mexico? And then Pat Buchanan spilt the beans and said it's got nothing to do with Mexico. It's paying off a bunch of bankers that had bad loans in Mexico.
What else is new? I mean,
So
you
what
see-
is that? What happens to that $50 billion if we give it to Mexico?
Well,
Does it
I-
actually literally go to Mexico and help anybody?
Well, I didn't do enough studying on it, but I do know this: when the bankers start creating money like that, it's not for your it's for your detriment, not for your good. Because every time these politicians have come up with one of their phony ploys, it's always put us in the tank deeper.
Pat Buchanan said it's not going to help any Mexicans.
I agree with that.
It's some people that
The
cut
people on the inside, on the take. That's what it's all about.
Wall Street. And
Well-
the big brokers out there got some bad loans in Mexico, and they want the American taxpayer to foot the bill now.
Well, just remember, in 1965, in 1965, the Joint Economic Congress and Committee, the experiment in social planning, that's what it's all about. They're experiment in social planning, and you and I are the guinea pigs. And they mean business, pal. We're not playing with little kids.
We're gonna ask you in a minute here about the change of the color of money and some of that stuff, but let's take a call first. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I've got two questions here. The first is for you, Ed, and, well, for you, Ed, Fred, if you want to jump in too. First one is, should we go back on the gold standard? And the second one is, should we go back to the Bretton Woods international system of fixed currency rates?
Well, that's part of our problem with the Bretton Woods Agreement. But I'll tell you right now, whether we go on a gold standard or whatever standard, if the people in charge can create it out of thin air, we'll have the same problem. That's where we have to get back to an honest money system. The creation has got to stop out of thin air.
So should we have an inflation rate of 0 then?
Well, by rights, yes. We shouldn't have inflation, period, if we had an honest money system.
Okay, but you know, the problem if you try to keep the inflation rate at 0 all the time is you can have deflation if you're not careful, because you know if you don't grow the money supply enough per year, given the increase in wealth in the economy, you're going to have a situation where you have a shortage of money.
You're correct there, but if in other words, if the money is created the way it is out of thin air, yes, you're right. But if we come back, for instance, the government, instead of change 2 words on this money, where it says Federal Reserve, look at the money in your pocket. It'll say Federal Reserve there. Change that to United States note. And our government needs goods and services. Pay the people with that United States note like Abraham Lincoln did. That's why he was assassinated, because of the money issue. And every one of the presidential assassinations has been assassinated because of the money issue. And John Kennedy did the same thing. Pay them that way, and you would not have the problem of the interest, because that's what's killing us. Usury is 1% interest is usury, and that's what's killing us.
Okay, does that help any caller?
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of interest, but that's because we've accumulated so much debt as a percentage of GNP in the last.
Well, you've been reading some university economists, which I tell you, right now you ought to start studying a little deeper.
Well, so you mean you don't think the national debt is the real problem behind the excessive?
What about your debt? What about your neighbor's debt? It's the same story. All money created out of thin air. It adds to the debt and the interest, and then if they don't create more, that's why they have these cockamamie screens checking the sex habits of a frog and all their goofy things that they come up with. If they would have, they have to do it to get money in the economy, and that's why they're doing that. But if we had an honest money system, we would not have all these cockamamie schemes.
Well, do you think we should get rid of all lending?
No, I wouldn't say that, because
Should the government not be allowed to borrow any money?
yes, definitely. That's what hard money is all about.
Okay, so we should have a balanced budget.
Well, that's what make a balanced budget. It'll never be balanced in a million years the way it is right now. And you can bet your bottom dollar on that, or your life on it. In fact.
Well, how should we balance it then?
Well, I just told you. In other words, when the government starts spending for goods and services, print out United States notes. That would be a start.
I mean, get the private bankers out and turn it back to the Treasury?
Exactly, because they have a lot of road projects that could be monetized, and put the money out there on these projects instead of have to go to the bond issues to do it. And that's what it's all about.
Well, Congress shall have the power to create and regulate the value of money.
And to coin it.
Article
That's
1,
fine.
section, he's
Yeah.
saying, Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution says, quote, only Congress shall have power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. Only Congress. And Article 1, Section 10, no state shall emit a bill of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. Coin, by the way, is capitalized.
They even had to wait for those coins, didn't they?
That's right.
Gold had to be so much weight.
Okay, now listen to this. Speaking of that, would you give me a gallon, please?
A gallon of
A
what?
gallon of what? A gallon is a unit of measure, right? Well, do you know a dollar is a unit of measure? Well, we took a dollar, 1935 and older, and we melted it down. It weighs 340 grains of pure silver. Hey, guess what? The law says a dollar is supposed to be 371 grains of pure silver. Anybody in the audience, if you have a ring on your finger, look on them rings on your fingers. There's a hallmark inside that ring. It's stamped either 10 karat, 14 karat, or 18 karat. That jeweler faces 15 years in prison if that's not within 4,000 finest of what's stamped on that ring. And that's a thickness of a piece of paper. You look on the rings on your own finger. But in 1903 with the Coinage Act, when the Stamping Act, hey, that's what it is.
They started
Debt.
shorting us on the coins.
Exactly.
So there'd be more, is that why they did it?
Well, they pulled a sham on us. I call it a sham.
Does that help you any, caller?
Well, I'm still confused on how we're going to balance the budget. I mean, are we going to raise taxes or cut spending or both?
Well, you're not going to do it with the system the way it is now, sir. And like I said, at one time, if we had United States notes out there, we would not have the usury we have to pay. Remember, 1% interest is usury.
What's the difference between a U.S. note and a U.S. bond?
Okay, thank you, caller.
Here, you made a good question, sir. Look on your, pull a buck out of your pocket, or a 5, or whatever you got in your pocket. See on the top where it says Federal Reserve note?
Yep. Yeah.
Change that to United States note. That's all you have to do. 2 words, change it on the paper money. And you realize they're working right now to put us into a cashless, checkless society. And that's what the scheme is all about, to control our every move.
You mean we'll have a debit card?
Well, that's right.
Time cards are debit cards.
Well, it's
So
simple
that's,
as
in this
that.
area, they're called the time card. But any kind of credit card is a way of getting people more deeper in debt, isn't it?
Well, that's what it's all about, control people.
Okay.
In fact, speaking of debt, I'm going to quote, well, in 1778, there's a quote out of my calendar in the month of November. It will always be as easy to rob an ignorant people of their liberty as to pick the pockets of a blind man. And you tell me.
Okay. Hello, caller. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to speak about the drug problem in today's youth.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not the topic.
Is that got to do? Are you trying to tie it in with the money system?
As far as I'm concerned, today's generation is pretty much going downhill, and I can attribute this to the drug problem in today's society.
Well, yes, I'll add to that. Guess what? In Mena, Arkansas, there's plane loads coming constantly into Mena, Arkansas from overseas coming into our country. And guess who's got his finger in it? The boys in the White House. Bush had his fingers in it also. There's a book by Bo Greitz who did a very big expose on it before the Congress. So you ought to check into that, because destroy the youth, and what have you got? Nothing but a bunch of imbeciles.
In those plane loads, there's marijuana and cocaine.
Well,
Is that
whatever.
what you're saying?
That's right. And that's where it's all come from, right out of the White House. And then the poor guys on the streets like you and me and anybody else, if you get involved in it, they'll put you in a slammer, but they're the ones prancing the streets in their lily white
Okay.
hands.
I think that does tie into money, though, because it creates, I mean, the drug business, that's almost creating things out of thin air, because they take something that they can grow down in South America real cheap. They buy it from the peasants cheap, turn it into a commodity called cocaine, bring it up here, and then they turn it into billions of dollars, and then the billions are sent back down to South America to the cocaine and drug marijuana cartels
Well,
down
I
there.
think that's a peanuts. The big money is in the White House, and don't you kid yourself.
A lot of it ends up down out of our.
Well.
That's why they put the metal strip in the bills.
Well, that is a
That's what they use for an excuse anyway.
That's what, well, yes, I agree with you there. But in 1969, I wrote a flyer, Beware Dollar of the Future, Visa, the Mark of the Beast, explaining, if you loan anybody any money, and if you're not licensed and registered to do so, well, let's say you loan your son $1,000. You can go to jail for a year and or $1,000 fine. They wrote this bill in 1969. Hey, I wrote a letter to Nixon at the time, asking how I can go about to be licensed and registered to extend credit to my customers. And I got news for you. I got a letter back when it was a no answer. So that's what it's all about, control of people. And that's not freedom.
Okay, let's take another call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I would just like to know, like, what's the difference? Like, if the silver dollar doesn't weigh the right amount or anything, or if the gold isn't exactly right, what's the difference?
A lot of difference. Let me ask you something. If you go buy a pound of butter or a dozen eggs, we'll give you 11 eggs instead of a dozen eggs. How do you feel about it?
He's calling, so
That's good.
it won't work though, really.
Well, that's as simple as that. You like 11 eggs instead of 12? You like 4 14 ounces instead of 16 ounces of steak that you're supposed to buy? That's cheating you, isn't it?
So these greenbacks are backed by nothing.
Correct.
At least in the old days, we had silver behind them, right?
That's right.
They called it a silver certificate.
Right. Well, then they would redeem them.
You could go in there and you could turn in a greenback and get $1 worth of silver.
Back in '64, when they talked about the redemption clause, redeem your silver certificates by such and such date, I don't remember what date it was anymore, people were bringing them in and they were getting the silver dollars, okay? Well, guess what? Many banks did not like to do that, so they're putting little granules of silver in a little envelope. You know how the dentist puts your tooth in a brown envelope? And that's how they were redeeming them then, because they didn't want to relinquish the silver dollars.
Is there any money left in Fort Knox? Is there any gold left?
I've read a report by Ed Duvall, he's passed down now, and they say it was all gone. So I am not an eyewitness to it, so I don't think so, but I am not an eyewitness, so I don't know. But Ed Duvall had some pretty good...
Where did he say it went to?
Well, that's a good question.
You know, the oil...
Went overseas,
well, that's what they say, but again, when I want to know firsthand, when I know something, I'll speak up, but I can't tell you firsthand. Was that fair enough?
Now, you said there's a... We're going to take a call in a minute again, but you said there's a private group of families that control the money in this country and probably the world.
Right.
But in this country, they didn't want to call it a central bank because it would scare too many people.
That's right.
So they broke it up into 12 Federal Reserves.
Well, they call it the Federal Reserve is a central bank. It is the central bank, but they didn't want to call it that when they got it in, because the purpose of the Federal Reserve was to eliminate panics and depressions. Think about it, panics and depressions.
So since 1913, this is
They make panics
create-
and depressions.
So
Exactly.
This is 82 years later now. These private families must be multi-trillion billionaires.
well,
They must be the richest people on earth.
Well, like I say, I don't care what you eat. You don't look undernourished, but what I'm saying is, you can only eat so many steaks at a time or so many bowls of spaghetti at a time, and by golly, look at here. In 1833, quote, "The banking system was the principal cause of social evil in the early 1800s. Tell me something. Don't we have that today?
Well, what are these rich guys
Yes.
doing with all this money?
Well,
I mean, how much of today's budget on the federal level is paid to the bankers to pay the debt off?
Well, they'll never be paid. This current system will never pay a dime.
It's quite a big hunk, though. It just goes for the debt.
Well, but they're never paying
The interest on the
They're
debt.
never paying the principal.
They're not paying the principal, they're paying the interest.
Never, never.
And we've seen smaller countries, foreign countries, go bankrupt.
I'd like to quote one more thing out of our calendar. In the month of December again. This was Daniel Webster back in the 1700s. Of all the contrivances for cheating the laboring classes of mankind, none has been more efficient than that which deludes them with paper money. The culprit, paper money.
Yeah, they used to say it was handy to carry around instead of all that bulky
Well-
gold.
Well,
It was lighter.
but look what happens.
Okay, let's take a call. Go
You
ahead,
know,
caller, you're on there.
A funny thing, you talk about this. I can remember you could buy a 1 pound loaf of bread unsliced in the 30s for a nickel, and if you bought it sliced, it was 10 cents, 12 cents.
Huh. Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Where did you get that hat?
That hat, my brother made that. He's a mountain man from northern Minnesota, kind of north of where he lives. Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Chuck, this is Buck.
Hey, Buck, how you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Good show tonight, better than Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
Dan, who was it that said, give me control of the nation's currency and I care not who makes their laws?
Rothschild from London,
okay.
England.
Well, I just picked up my brother. He come back from Russia here. He was over there. You know the currency, the underground economy in Russia?
Yeah.
What is it?
Greenbacks.
I don't know.
Greenbacks. The ruble is basically worthless, and they're just about in hyperinflation now. And the way my brother maneuvered around over there was with cigarettes and booze and greenbacks.
Well, interesting thing. Communism is dead, right? That's
right.
what they.
But socialism
No.
is not. You
Wait a
gotta
minute,
be
now
careful
hold
of
it. Sir, just listen a second.
that. You betcha.
They said communism is dead, right? Let me ask you something. All 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, the guidelines that they go by, is implemented as law in the United States of America today. So we're now America with a K, not America with a C. because we're living under the dictates and doctrines of communism.
Well,
And communism is total government.
yeah, that's somewhat true, but what other country is better off than the U.S.?
Oh, wait a minute now. You know what the boys in Lyndon Johnson's regime said?
What?
We will merge America into the likes of the Soviet Union, unbeknown to the American people.
It ain't going to happen. You know why?
It's already happened, sir.
You know why Russia fell?
Wait a minute. Have they fallen? Yeah, United States too.
Yeah, you know why the Soviet Union fell?
They couldn't pay the bills.
Partly, we basically bankrupted them.
Well, what about don't you think our country's bankrupt?
Sure.
All right, we officially in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt bankrupt our country.
Right, a no deal.
All right, now international bankruptcy is coming when the New World Order thing, because all your armed service boys,
Right.
you're not fighting for Americans, you're fighting at Americans now because they're using these foreign troops, just like you people are familiar with the high school students when they had foreign exchange students.
Right.
They're doing the same thing with the military. Now, naturally, a military man would think twice before he put a bayonet into his own people's thing, but they didn't think twice down in Waco, Texas, when they bombed them out and burned them out they didn't even have a warrant. They didn't have a warrant to do it, and they burned them out and bombed them out. Hey, look, it's an abomination. Our country's got to obey the law because they've got the firepower. They got the manpower to do what they won't do.
Who's they? UN?
The United States government, which is controlled by the UN.
Yeah, we're under foreign
Dictates.
leaders of our military.
Right now, we have more police out there, and every time you turn around, you're driving down a highway, everybody's always concerned about getting picked up by a cop. And when I was a youth, we didn't feel like that.
Right. Well, now, what sort of advice you got for us common folk like me? I'm just a common buck here.
Learn your rights.
Okay, thanks a lot, Buck. We'll let him answer.
Learn your rights. If you don't know them, you don't use them. If you don't use them, you lose them. Learn how to use your rights. That's what it's all about.
Well, Governor Thompson just said he's going to turn the state police loose and let them write more tickets than ever.
Well, there it is. That's extortion, and that's called mulct. And look this word up in the dictionary, M-U-L-C-T. Now, you know something, speaking of that, when you made me think of something, on the Eighth Amendment, no cruel or unusual punishment shall be in the United States. Well, think, due to all the abuses in the Constitution, more crime is committed in one day in the courtrooms of America than in the streets in a whole year. And if you think I'm not kidding you, learn your rights, learn your Constitution, then go sit in a courtroom and watch how they mulct them. M-U-L-C-T means when you get hit for a fine that you never hurt anyone's life, liberty, or property. And that's what it's all about. When you abuse someone's life, liberty, or property, pal, you got to pay. And for instance, speaking of that, also...
So a lot of this stuff is revenue enhancers, revenue
Exactly.
raisers.
And that's a bill of attainder. See, that's again a bill of attainder when you study the bill of attainder. But listen to this. Well, what are we going to do to a rapist? What are we going to do to a murderer? Well, I got news for you. The scripture says they shall be put to death. And that's what it's all about. And anybody steals from anyone, you should pay double back. By the thief to the victim.
So
We don't do that, though, do we?
No.
That's where our problems come from.
Well, you know, this is quite an interesting subject, and seems like the more you go on, it makes you want to ask more questions. One of the ones I want to ask right now, before we take some more calls, is what about this deal? We've been hearing for years now. They're going to change the color of money. They're going to take these green. They're almost worthless now. They're down to a nickel, you say. They're going to totally take these out of circulation and introduce a new colored bill. That's been the rumor for years. What do you hear
Well,
about
I've heard that since back in 1968. But I can tell you right now, there's a strip inside of there. And if you took that strip out, which I think a few people have done that I'm aware of, I didn't say for sure now, I said I think, that you take it out and you put it on a phonograph machine, and it does a little click. It's a magnetic strip in there. See, because eventually the old ones will be called counterfeit, and will have to have that strip in there. That's a fact of life. You can get a magnifying glass, put your new money underneath a glass, and you'll see that strip on there on the 10s. I don't know if the 5 has them yet, but I know 5s, 10s, 20s, and 50s, and 100s have them. And so you tell me.
Well, one thing it does, it trips off the things at the airport.
Well, that's another ballgame.
A lot of the drug dealers that
Well,
are leaving the country with
no.
suitcases full of money, it clicks,
Well,
it makes them.
I got news for you. When they set up these airport things with these machines, you know, going through the so-called hijacking thing, that's all put up by the government to set us up, to condition us, our mental capacity, to condition us for thinking of a police state. Remember, name me 3 things you can do without once getting a license: get a permit, pay a tax, or use your social surveillance number. And a social surveillance number, when it came in back in the 35 or 6 or so, it was never to be used for identification. Think about it. Never to be used for identification. Guess what? What are they using for IDs now? That's what the law said, pal.
Just about everywhere you turn, they want your social security number now.
That's right.
And your children, when they're born, they have to get a number.
Well, no, people are fighting that legally, and I do know a few people who do not have them and won't get them. And I won't partake with it anymore, and simple as that. In ignorance, yes, we've all got them through ignorance. But I got news for you. I am out of all contracts. I have no contractual obligations anymore, and I'm not about to get any more.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the welfare problem, Eau Claire. What do you guys think about it? I mean, the minority's sucking it all out of the system. I mean, especially the monks. I was just wondering what you thought about that.
Well, listen now.
Would we get rid of the poverty if we could get rid of these worthless greenbacks?
Well, first thing is, all the Oriental people who come in this country were forced out of their country at a point of a bayonet by our soldier boys. Think about the My Lai massacre, Kali and those guys. They go there and nail those people at the point of a bayonet, shoot them down, wipe out whole towns. They're trying to go someplace to have some peace too. Because from what I observed, they're hardworking also. They're hardworking people. And our people have sloughed off and not done the job of eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. And we have not been vigilant in our own state house. And that's where our problems is. Because they want in here, they want to create a problem. Here, speaking of what you're saying, they got to create a problem, right? They have to have the North and the South go, the East and the West, white and black, Catholics and Protestants, Christians and Jews, back and forth, conflicting with each other, when we should be looking here at the problem right here. And we will be looking at Mickey Mouse when we should be looking at the problem right here, the money issue.
You know, something that happened here, a lot of the Hmongs were growing vegetables, cucumbers and things like that, and they were advised by social workers that if they did that, they would deduct that money that they earned from their checks. So they stopped
Took away
working.
the incentive.
They took away the incentive.
Now, I wonder who did that. See, look by who's doing it and who's behind it.
It was government social workers.
Well, and who controls the government? Is the politicians controlled by the bankers? As simple as that.
So I understand that the reason that, can you give us a short example of the reason why everything has to have a license and why our car has a title?
Control.
Do they use that car and as
Well,
as a
the certificate of title.
in the houses and stuff, all the property that they
Well,
have?
listen, what I learned I used to lobby back in the late 60s and early 70s, and these legislatures will get a stack of bills this high. Hey, they can't read them. And the sad part of it is they keep passing this, and the Upper Midwest Research and Development Council is the 7th floor of the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. Any piece of legislation that has to do with control of people, they are behind it, lobbying there. And these lawmakers are a bunch of stoops. I don't care who they are. They're nothing but a bunch of puppets who are paid to do what the Upper Midwest Research and Development Council says. Now, I don't know what council you're in for, but if it's one down in Chicago, the Midwest, Upper Midwest is Minneapolis, and they have like all Federal Reserve banks, and that's what it's all about. Social control.
Well, they sure do introduce enough bills each year. I went to the university library a few months back when I was running for Congress to study one of my opponents, and I started reading the bills that were introduced in Madison, and there was thousands of them.
That's right. And
How is anyone going to know the law when there's 1,000
what about
bills introduced every
that
year?
health bill was a couple thousand pages, the crime bill a couple thousand, and not one of those people read those bills. Now you people out there have to get on the ball and start learning your rights. Learn to use them. If you don't use them, you lose them. Now we have to learn them.
But just imagine all them bills stacked on top of each other. You don't know what half of them mean.
That's why this calendar is so invaluable, because we have to educate people with 4 5s. Now you may not have heard this before. You know what I mean by 4 5s? 5 words or less, 5 seconds, 5th grade level, and 5 times. Please learn that issue.
Okay, let's take another call here. We're down to the last 5 minutes. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, do you ever think we'll get back on the gold standard?
Well,
Some people say that's the way to
do
go.
I think eventually it'll have to be, but not for a while, because we're going to have to bite the dust yet, and I don't see it coming yet until we repent. Because, you see, when you repent, you ask for divine help, divine guidance, and you pray for it. Because that's why George Washington had National Day of Prayer and Fasting. And when our country turns around, when we repent, we don't go back and do our evil ways, then do we? Because that's what Jesus said when he talked to the tax collectors. Well, what did he mean by that? He wanted them to not hurt and oppress people. Because he said, well, do you see anyone? Do you go to a doctor when you're well? No. He was implying that the tax collectors were mentally ill. And that's a fact of life. You study that issue out.
Huh. Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah. Yeah, Randy Bedminster, also known as Common Man. My biggest problem I think I got with banks, I think, is their lending policies.
Huh, well, thank you very much.
are
What do
we
you
talking
think about that?
We were just talking about it, create money out of thin air.
He wants to know if,
Well, I mean, you couldn't have said it any better.
huh, you know, that is amazing that,
People have to learn that issue. If they don't, they're dead.
now, you think this is a red herring or pickled herring, whatever, this balanced budget, phony baloney, they want to make it a amendment to the Constitution so it pushes it out 7 years?
I got news for you.
You think they're just trying to put it on the back burner?
That's just to throw you a couple of sugar coatings out there and make you think they're going to do something when they're liars. Because if the bank can pay $12 for 1,000 of these and then loan them back to the government, I got news for you. They're liars and a fraud and a cheat. And they don't belong in there. They stole your vote.
Couldn't the House of Representatives just introduce a bill tomorrow and pass it the same day, send it to the Senate, let them pass it, and let the president up or down on it, sign it?
I got news for you.
Why do they have to wait 7 years?
Well, exactly. Now, why do you suppose they're doing that? Just to make you think you're getting something. In other words, they know the people are upset a little bit. But
Now it's got to go through, if it does get passed, it's got to go through 38 state legislatures and drag it on for 7 years before it becomes law.
well, interesting thing, most of the lawyers in the legislature, most of the boys in the legislature are lawyers. And you know something? In colonial times, most of the colonies prohibited the practice of law, in other words, lawyers for hire. They prohibited it. And the lawyers, incidentally, are the cause of our problems. Because they're in the courthouses, they're in the legislatures, and they're the ones inflicting these police state laws on you, and no one else is.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more call. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Follow up to the common man question. I don't like banks either, but don't you think that a lot of it's just people's own moral weakness? Credit's so easy and their eyeballs are bigger than their ability to repay?
Well,
Mean
that's part of the problem, but
Thank you.
remember, and that's another reason why they got the credit cards in here, so you can create the money yourself, but then you're back in debt, and that's a cause of why so many broken homes are out there. Because you see, and that's why it takes so many people to make ends meet. And then the interest rate, the usury, that's usury, pal. The scriptures define usury. Well, Martin Luther said a great thing. A usurer is worse than a threefold thief and a murderer.
You know, back several years ago, I took a loan out on a car. It cost me 17.5% on a used car.
Oh.
Yeah, that was the rough days back there. Well, Dan, we're down to the last minute and a half here, so a lot of people are going to want to ask you more about this, and I know you've got an address and a phone number that you want to give out, because you create more questions than you answer, and the same thing happened with Byron Dale. We spent 3 hours
All
afterwards.
right, if anybody wants to learn anything, they can order our calendar with the Bill of Rights, and we'll send you a lot of other literature with it. So I would suggest that you send $10 in to 704 Edgerton, Edgerton, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55101. The phone number is area code 612-771-5234. 612-771-5234. And we have information there that's invaluable and get you started on back to freedom, because that's what it's going to take. America has to restore our freedom.
But they don't have to buy this, and if they
No.
want to just ask you questions, they can call
Well, they'll have to call in their nickel will.
612-771-5234. I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, and this has been the Cow Report. I've been your host, Chuck Lee, and with me is Fred the Truth Stafford, and tonight's guest was Dan Pilla. I want to thank you for coming over, Dan. We'll see you again right here next week on the Cow Report.
Thank you.
Good
Next
evening.
week at 2 o'clock?
Next week, 2 o'clock.